Becoming fluent in English in just 8 months might sound like a big challenge, but I'm here to tell you that it's absolutely possible. When I first set out to improve my English, 8 months seemed like such a long time. But as I dove deeper into my learning, I realized that 8 months was the perfect amount of time to really see meaningful progress. As long as I stayed committed, focused, and followed the right steps. Let me take you through how I managed to become fluent in 8 months and how you can do the same. First, the foundation. The key to becoming fluent in any language is consistent practice. It doesn't matter if you're practicing for 10 minutes or 3 hours. The most important thing is that you make it a part of your daily routine. For me, the first step was simply committing to study every single day. Some days were harder than others, but knowing that I was making steady progress kept me going. I set aside time every morning to learn new words and phrases. Even if I had a busy day ahead, I would wake up 15 minutes earlier just to do something in English. The consistency of it made all the difference. You don't have to study for hours, but the key is making it a habit. One thing I also did was create a learning schedule. I split up my 8 months into phases. The first 3 months were focused on learning basic vocabulary, understanding common phrases, and mastering simple grammar rules. I wanted to build a solid foundation. Then, for the next few months, I focused more on speaking and listening practice. By the end of the 8 months, I wanted to be able to speak comfortably and confidently. Next, immersion. One of the most effective ways to become fluent is to immerse yourself in the language. The more you surround yourself with English, the faster you will pick it up. At the beginning, I watched movies with English subtitles, listened to podcasts, and tried reading books or articles in English. But over time, I found that I needed to go deeper. I wanted to really understand the culture behind the language. So I started watching more complex videos, listening to English conversations, and engaging with the language in a way that felt more natural. But here's the trick. I didn't just passively watch or listen. I interacted with the content. If I watched a movie, I would pause it and repeat lines. I would try to mimic the pronunciation and rhythm of the characters. If I heard a new word or phrase, I would write it down and then try to use it in my own conversations. It wasn't about memorizing everything, but actively participating in the language. Then, I also tried to think in English as much as possible. This was a game changer for me. At first, I would think in my native language and then translate things into English. But over time, I started thinking in English without translating. I started by thinking about my day, describing things I saw, or narrating my actions in English. This helped me gain a much better understanding of how sentences are structured and how to speak without pausing to translate in my head. One of the most important aspects of becoming fluent is speaking. At first, I was hesitant to speak because I was afraid of making mistakes. But the truth is, speaking is one of the fastest ways to improve. I made sure to practice speaking every day. I spoke to myself, to my friends who were also learning English, and to language partners online. Even if I made mistakes, I didn't let that discourage me. Instead, I treated mistakes as opportunities to improve. I also found language exchange partners to be incredibly helpful. I used apps like HelloTalk and Tandem to connect with native English speakers. We would help each other by practicing conversation. It was a safe space to practice speaking without the fear of judgment. And most importantly, I learned a lot of slang and everyday expressions that I wouldn't have found in textbooks. Now, while speaking was important, so was listening comprehension. Early on, I didn't understand much when I listened to native speakers. It was overwhelming because they spoke so fast, and I didn't recognize many of the words. But I kept at it. I started with slow-paced content, like podcasts for beginners or YouTube videos with clear English, and gradually worked my way up to more natural, faster speech. Slowly, I started recognizing more words, and my comprehension improved. I remember that at first, it was difficult to keep up with conversations. But after about 4 months, I noticed that I was understanding a lot more. The key was listening regularly. Whether it was in the car, on the bus, or while doing chores, I made it a habit to listen to English content all day. Even if I didn't understand everything, it still helped me familiarize myself with the flow and rhythm of the language. And here's something else I did. I read out loud. It might sound strange, but reading out loud helped me with my pronunciation and speaking confidence. I read everything from books to news articles to social media posts. The more I read aloud, the more comfortable I became with speaking in English, and it helped me understand the flow of conversation better. Also, learn phrases, not just individual words. One thing I wish I had learned earlier was the importance of learning phrases instead of just individual words. You can learn tons of vocabulary, but if you don't know how to use those words in real-life situations, they won't be as useful. So, when I learned new words, I made sure I learned how to use them in context. For example, if I learned the word delicious, I didn't just memorize it. I learned phrases like, "This food is delicious," or "That cake looks delicious." This made it easier for me to speak naturally and confidently. Now, let's talk about grammar. Grammar is important, but I learned not to stress too much about getting every rule perfect. Focus on the basics and don't overthink it. For the first few months, I focused on the most essential grammar points. Things like how to form basic sentences, how to ask questions, and how to use common tenses. I didn't spend hours studying complex grammar rules because I knew that I would get better with grammar as I continued speaking and listening. I didn't let it stop me from communicating. As the months went on, I started to notice something amazing. I began to think in English without forcing it. I was no longer trying to translate in my head. English just started flowing naturally. I didn't have to pause and think about the right words anymore. It felt like English had become a part of me. This is the feeling you want to aim for. Fluency doesn't mean perfection. It means being able to communicate easily. Another thing that helped me tremendously was reading books and articles in English. I started with simple texts like children's books and short articles, and then gradually moved on to more complex material. I would read a few pages every day, and each time, I would try to underline new words or phrases I didn't know. I would look them up and use them in my own sentences. Reading in English was one of the most effective ways I learned new vocabulary and expressions. When I reached the 6-month mark, I felt like I had gained a solid foundation. By now, I was able to understand most conversations and express myself clearly in most situations. I didn't worry about being perfect. I was more focused on communicating and improving. And by the time I hit 8 months, I was speaking with more confidence than I had ever imagined. I could easily have conversations in English, listen to movies without subtitles, and express myself without hesitation. Now, I want to emphasize something really important. Fluency is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. But 8 months of consistent effort, smart practice, and learning can transform you into someone who can confidently speak and understand English. Just like any skill, it takes time and persistence. But once you make that commitment and put in the work, you'll see results. And those results are worth every effort. As you continue on your own journey to fluency, keep the mindset that learning is fun. It's not about perfection. It's about progress. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes, and the more confidence you gain. As you continue on your journey to fluency, it's so important to remember that learning is a process, not a destination. I know at times it might feel frustrating. There will be days when you feel like you're not making any progress. Maybe you're stuck on a certain word or phrase, or you just can't remember the grammar rule correctly. But let me tell you something. Progress is progress, no matter how small. Every single effort you make counts. You see, when I was learning English, I faced so many moments of doubt. I questioned myself over and over. But instead of letting those doubts control me, I started to think of my learning journey as a series of small victories. Each time I understood something new, each time I made a mistake and corrected myself, each time I had a successful conversation in English, that was a win. It's easy to get discouraged when things aren't going as fast as you want, but it's so important to focus on the progress you've made, not just the things you still need to work on. Fluency is built slowly, step by step. It's like building a house. Each day, you lay down another brick, and eventually, it's all going to come together. But if you focus too much on the gaps in your knowledge or the mistakes you make, it can feel like you're never getting anywhere. That's why it's crucial to celebrate the small victories along the way. When you successfully introduce yourself in English, when you have a conversation with someone, when you understand a movie or song without subtitles, those are moments to be proud of. Each of these achievements is proof that you're moving closer to fluency. Subscribe